Well, the one day that it decides to put 100 millimeters rain down is unfortunately the day that we also have one of our best speakers for the entire year. So I'm pleased that those who have made it, and it's a real shame for those who haven't. However, we are recording this, so that'll be good. So first, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and current. For our final and last breakfast seminar of 2018, it's a great pleasure to welcome renowned Finnish educational expert, Dr. Pasi Sahlberg, who recently arrived in Australia, having been appointed by the Gonski Institute for Education. Pasi was previously Director General of the Finnish education system, and for those of you who have been living under a rock, Finland has quite a story to tell when it comes to education. Back in 2001, the results of the OECD's Programme for International Student Assessment, PISA, the survey results for this were released. The survey looked at the educational performance of 15-year-olds in 32 nations. Finland, a small Scandinavian country of just 5 million people, placed in the top 5 nations for mathematics and science and came first for reading. The Finnish education system was and is very different from our own. Formal teaching doesn't start until age 7. Its highly autonomous teachers have master's degrees and standardized testing is minimized. An unconventional approach by our standards, but the results speak for themselves. Now, Pasi is tackling a very different educational challenge in Australia, addressing the growing inequality in our schools, particularly in remote and rural regions. Pasi is a former maths and science teacher. Pasi has been an education expert for the World Bank and the European Commission. He chairs the Open Societies Foundation's Global Education Board and is a member of the governing education advisors for the Scottish Government. He is also a prolific author, and his book, Finnish Lessons 2.0, What Can the World Learn from Educational Change in Finland, won the 2013 Groemeyer Award for an idea that has potential to change the world. Pasi received the 2012 Education Award in Finland, the 2014 Robert Owen Award in Scotland, the 2016 Lego Prize and Rockefeller Foundation Bellagio Resident Fellowship in 2017. He is someone that I think we should all be listening to in this country, so please join me in welcoming Dr. Pasi Sahlberg as he presents.
Okay, thank you very much. I would also like to recognize the traditional owners of this land where we are this morning and pay my respect to elders past, present, and the future. And I'm very proud to say this as a new Aussie comer. I just brought my family here 2 weeks ago from snowy Helsinki, Finland, and we are permanent residents here now for a while. I guess as long as the education system in Australia is fixed, then I go somewhere else. No, seriously, that's not probably going to happen during my term. But I'm definitely honored to be part of this wonderful community. You know, as somebody, if you listen to my past, what I've done around the world, obviously there would have been many opportunities to be employed in this field than Sydney, Australia. So that's why many people ask me that, so why did you end up coming to Australia on the other side of the world rather than, staying in Europe or remaining in the US? I stayed there, I worked in the United States for 8 years, but I'm fine now. And and I say that, of all the places in the world that I can imagine when it comes to education and school, public education, there are probably 2 places that have more potential to really make a shift and show the rest of the world what these schools can be. The other one is Canada. You're going to hear about Canada a little bit more. And the other one definitely is this part of the world, New Zealand and Australia. When you look at the big picture, that there are so many things that you can do, and particularly this state here, the New South Wales, that is, I guess this is probably the biggest one education system in the world. that you have a Department of Education here that has 2,200 schools and governs the whole system. This is not what we do in Finland or many other countries, and that's why, at the same time, the fact that you have a peculiar system here, one system, it may be a problem in many ways, but it's also a huge opportunity to do things within the system. That's why I say that if I want to work, if I want to be part of something that may end up being a transformation to the next generation schooling, it may happen here or it may happen in New Zealand. I don't know, but that's certainly a part of the world that many people like me who does research on international education is very closely looking at. So thank you for having us here. One of the questions that people were asking my family and myself, we have two little children, 3 and 6-year-olds, who are about to go to school. So one of the questions from your colleagues here has been that, so where do you kind of find a good school for your children? And I said, that what question is that? That in Finland, Helsinki, we never ask this question because the good school is just around the corner. So we don't really think about where the good schools are. And of course, I understand why people ask these questions here. So my response, my response has been that I'm going to do what any serious researcher or scientist would do, is to make a social experiment on my own children. Send them to the nearest public school here and then write a paper out of that. I have a lot of stories to tell, good stories about our early experiences here, but this morning is not about that. I'm going to speak to you about a little bit about Finland, but mostly kind of a big picture things, that what have we learned from the world. And of course, Finland is not the only one, but Finland is one of those exemplars, something that has really inspired a lot of research and policies and discussions in order to do what I would like to see here in Australia, and what many of you have been doing so far. So I try to keep my monologue here shorter, so that we can have time for conversation there. If you want to take a look at these slides and images, I'm going to post these on my website right after this. My Twitter account here, I'll tweet it as well, so you will see that. So as you heard, my workplace now is, thank you, workplace is the Gonski Institute for Education at the University of New South Wales. That is, I work there with the former minister Adrian Piccoli, and we are really kind of passionate about moving forward with this one. Are you ready for this? Yep. Do you understand my English all right? Yep. Are you sure? Because I can also speak Finnish. There's at least somebody here who understands Finnish. There's some people say early morning like this, it doesn't really make any difference what language you speak. Okay, I'll try to run quickly this thing. So what I'm going to do within this 30 minutes or 25 minutes is to look at the international research. This is a research seminar here, so that's going to be the focus. Then a few words about equity, and this is something that has been very much in the headlines and conversation around the world, and it's been a conversation here in Australia. And so thirdly, what can we learn from other countries, and a couple of examples from my old home country, and then we can have a conversation. So, if you heard in the introduction that something happened in 2001, if this was year 2000 and we were gathering here around the same questions, that what can we learn from the other countries? What does the international landscape of education look like? It would look very different. The speaker would not be me, obviously, because nobody knew anything about Finland. Some people say that in the year 2000 Finland didn't exist, especially when it came to education. Some of the candidate countries are there, and before the first OECD PISA results were released in 2001, these countries and some others were kind of candidates to be the highest performing systems. And Finland was never there. I was working at the University of Helsinki and with the Ministry of Education as well in Finland at that time, and I clearly remember year 2001 when everybody knew that the OECD will release the first PISA results in December 2001, and we were like shaking back home because we were concerned that we are not going to do very well in this study. And there were many reasons to do that. One was that we had just joined the European Union, and it was a kind of a sign of, what our role as a member of the European Union will be from the education point of view. The other one was that we had a then fairly young, newly resigned education system that was based on the completely public comprehensive school system that was heavily criticized politically since the early 1980s. And some of us, including me, we thought that if the first PISA results would show that Finland will be not doing very well, that would be enough evidence for those who were saying that the comprehensive kind of a publicly run school system without private schools and without competition and testing and comparing schools is a bad idea. And that's why there's a lot at stake when it came. Actually, we had only one expectation regarding the first PISA study, and that was that we want to be better than Sweden. And other than that, we don't really care. So when we put these what happened in 2001 into that context of kind of expectations from around the world that certain education systems must be doing well, like Germany and Sweden and Norway and many others, and then our own kind of fears of that things may lead to a kind of a fundamental change if the results were not good, may help you to understand what happened. So this was the December 2001, what we saw and what the world saw through the first OECD PISA study, where you see Finland, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Ireland, and South Korea on the top. And what is interesting here, and I want you to take this away, because there are some people who say that Finland has always aimed to be number one, and it's been easy for us because we are small and homogeneous and all those things. But that has never been the Finnish aim. Finland was actually the last country within the OECD who was voting against ever have the study like PISA, because we said that we should not compare countries. We cannot have one metric that compares countries so different than Finland and Mexico and Japan and others. That we need other type of information. But all the other OECD countries were saying that, we should go with this type of assessment, so Finland had to accept. So this is what happened, and we were. I was a university professor that time in Helsinki, and I remember vividly this morning when these results came out. My phone rang in the morning, and one of my colleagues from another university called and said that, so how do we explain that? And I said, what these PISA results? Because Finland is number one, and now people are asking that, what's the secret behind you? I said, we don't have any secrets in Finland. And then the media started to call, and then the minister called me. It's the same thing, and I said, we have no idea. Can you imagine? The university professors and the highest experienced academicians say that we have no idea how to explain this. And then seriously, this is a serious story. We decided, okay, we have to find a kind of an explanation to this. And obviously, there's no simple explanation to the complex social thing like this that nobody expected. So the outcome was, and we had several meetings, the outcome was that the OECD must have made a mistake. Sometimes when you measure length, you use centimeters instead of inches. And we said there must be a kind of a measuring mistake that the OECD has done. So we decided, following that conclusion, to do nothing. Let's remain quiet and hope that nobody will realize that there was a mistake. And some of us were saying that maybe 3 years later, when the next cycle comes, the OECD says that we are very sorry that we've made a horrible mistake with Finland, and Finland should actually be somewhere there in the middle. The only thing that really made us happy was that Sweden was number 9. So this is what happened 3 years later in 2003 study. And again, there were still people in the country. I was serving in Washington, D.C. with the World Bank at that time, so I was not part of the kind of daily conversations. But I remember that there were people who were saying that maybe the OECD made the same mistake twice. And in the third time, in 2006, that you see here, the OECD then corrects this mistake, but it never happened. And I'm showing you, my PISA story ends here because, this is the time when, my own research really started to shift towards kind of a comparative education, trying to really understand two types of questions. And there were many researchers here in Australia and Canada and US, around the world with the same type of aim, that we were asking two critical questions. One is that, so what could explain this unexpected performance of some of these education systems as measured by the OECD PISA study in the first 3 cycles of PISA. Can we identify like factors of good systems, just like we had that time through research, a fairly kind of reliable list of characteristics of effective schools? That's what we knew. We knew what makes a good school, year 2000. But nobody had an idea what makes a good education system. So this was our question number 1. Then the question number 2 was that, so what explains the fact that many of those education systems that were thought to be performing well were not doing well at all? Actually, many of them were declining. Okay? And Australia has been one of those systems that was performing well and has been declining. New Zealand is the other one, and there are many others. So we started to work on those 2 really fundamentally important research questions, and my research pretty much has been focusing on that during the last 10 years together with my colleagues around the world. I'm not going to go, it's a bigger story, a longer story to get a kind of a detailed thing about what exactly have we learned. If you want to read more about those, some of my works include a better analysis on those things. But instead, I would like to, I would like to give you 3 kind of a key lessons. And this may be, hopefully this is relevant for Australia as well. So the first one is that, most of those actually all of the education systems that have not been successful, trying hard and putting a lot of money and effort to try to transform and inform the system, have one way or the other had a belief or faith behind the policies and practice that the competition is the best way to enhance the quality of the system performance. And competition, of course, between competition can have many forms. It can have vouchers or school choice or other policies that give rewards based on how parents choose schooling for their children. And on the contrary, the education systems like Finland and Canada and some others have had a very strong policy of cooperation and collaboration, sharing, seeing education as a kind of a collective thing that we do together for our communities and children, where the policies have deliberately tried to avoid and keep the elements away that would lead schools to compete against one another. So it's a very fundamental difference in many of those education systems. Then the other one is the kind of a insistence of accountability in education systems among those countries where the results have not been improving. And this often comes with the consequences. We call it the consequential accountability. That means that if you don't perform, if you give the money and you don't perform for any reason, you will have kind of a punitive consequences. In extreme cases, your school will be closed or you will be fired or some privileges will be taken away. And on the other side, again, Canada and Finland and some other systems have been deliberately trying to build trust in educators, schools, and particularly teachers, so that the kind of a primary thinking, a primary policy behind what we do is to trust the teachers and schools' judgment over the most critical things, what they do, curriculum and assessment and pedagogy and many other things. Completely different, these are like different paradigms when you compare those countries. And then the third one is the very active drive towards school choice and parental choice regarding schools and opening all kinds of alternative charter schools and free schools and private schools, you name it, in those education systems that have struggled to get better or have been declining, whereas on the other side, the other movement, the successful systems have been systematically enhancing and investing in what we call equity in education. So there are many others. This is just 3 examples for you. Are you with me so far? Yeah, good. So let me say a couple of words about what equity in education means. Why is it important? The interesting thing is that the OECD itself, this is something that many people do not know, that the OECD itself, after these 3 cycles of PISA, did exactly what we are doing here. That we said, okay, so what's going on here? Because it seems like, the successful education systems and those who have been successfully reforming the education systems have all, in one way or the other, elevated equity in education as a kind of a priority thing. Okay, and this is what happened in 2011. The OECD put all this evidence and research together and published this report called Equity and Quality in Education, very important and significant part of the OECD's research work. And this kind of triggered a global movement, including here in Australia, the similar efforts to take a closer look at what is equity and why is it important. And this is what happened in the US. This is a Congress, the US Congress in Washington, D.C. had a commission that came out with a report called For Each and Every Child. Basically the same thing. What would it take in America to make American education more equal and equitable? And this is the Ontario example, about the same time, 2012, I think it was, about the inclusion in the state of the province of Ontario in Canada. And this is our own Gonski first review about the school funding, equal funding for more needs-based equal funding for schools. And then came earlier this year, just 6 weeks ago, the OECD published another equity in education work, just underlying this importance of equity in education as the OECD sees that. And then finally, last week, the UNICEF released this. You probably saw this in the headlines in our newspapers here, an unfair start about the inequality in the wealthy, rich countries around the world. Exactly the same thing, and emphasize kind of a calling for policymakers and practitioners and legislators to take this seriously, the equity. And it still has not happened around the world. If you go and see this last UNICEF report, this is what our newspapers here reported last week, that Australia has one of the most unequal school systems in the world, and this is where Australia really is. And the interesting thing is that this is the preschool here, and this is the primary school and secondary school. If you look at Australia here, 25th in early childhood, 36th. So if you look at the early years of education, Australia is really in the bottom here, and that's what many countries like Finland and others now realize, and research is very clear about that if you really want to make the best return of your investments in people anywhere through education, invest in early years. Okay? And this is exactly the opposite that is happening here in this country. That a lot of money goes to the further education and higher education when the returns of these investments are much weaker and smaller than otherwise. So this alone, together with all this other research evidence, is a call for this country, all of us, to speak more about equity and equality in education. What does it mean for the system? What does it mean for the schools? However, we have to be always careful not to leave teachers and schools and principals with the impression that they alone can fix this thing. This is not what's going to happen. That's why the Gonski Institute is helping this conversation through research and advocacy work to make sure that we really understand the kind of a complex nature of equity and equality in education. It's not only about education, it's about health and social issues, many other things that makes it so difficult. So equity, of course, this is something that is a necessary conversation, and we need to be clear that people understand what we are talking about. Equity, I'm not the English is my third language, so I have to kind of work hard to really understand what the words mean in English, sometimes in Finnish too. But the equity, of course, has many meanings. Equality and equity is often used as synonyms, and too long we have been insisting that education have to be equal, that we have to have equal opportunities and equal attention and curriculum should be the same for everybody. But that's not what equity is. Equity means that we give, like you see on the right-hand side, that we give children and individuals or schools what they need to succeed. And that's what makes teaching and learning in school so complicated. People say that teaching is not rocket science. It's much harder than that. And there are people who work neurosurgeons or who operate people's hearts say that teaching in a primary school is much harder than open heart surgery, because if you a surgeon, you have just one patient there with an open heart at the time, and you have 20 people helping you. But in a primary school classroom, you have 25 individuals and one teacher there. And they're all different. They have all different needs. That's what makes teaching extremely complicated and difficult if we take it seriously. So that's the thing. So Gonski review had one of the best definitions for equity if you want to help people to understand what we are talking about, is this. This is in the 2011 report. I regularly use this as a definition for equity because I think it's a simple, beautiful, comprehensive way to answer this question. So what does the research say? So there are many things that we can take from. I just show you a couple of examples. We now regularly, including the OECD reports, we use the term resiliency. We talk about resilient children in different countries as a kind of a one index of equity. And what resiliency here means is what you see here in this image, that we all this research is often actually always looking at where the children, what type of kids they have, where they live, and where they come from. So we estimate the social economic kind of a profile or index for every student that is here, and it's typically divided into 4 quartiles. So these are the disadvantaged kids here, and those are the kids who are better off. And then we are measuring their learning performance, only academic stuff until now. So here are the kids who are in the top quartile of the performance in reading, math, and science, and those are those kids who struggle. Now, resiliency means that we are looking at this bottom quartile of kids, disadvantaged kids. How many of them can beat the odds and perform like the best kids? Right? You with me? Okay. So it's a very simple, it's a basically simple way to calculate, and this is what we have seen now in the last OECD PISA data. All the OECD data that is available, have all the OECD countries here, and you will see that the OECD average is about 29% of 15-year-olds across the OECD countries are so-called resilient students. So they are those who are disadvantaged kids and are able to perform like the top international quartile. So this is very important. We are looking at the international resiliency here. This is Australia. So Australia is doing just a tiny little bit better than the OECD average. So it's not really a bad news. It's a consistent with other research findings when it comes to the equity in this country. This country is our country's education system. So this is where Finland is here, and then the Southeast Asian systems are over there. Now, what the OECD has done through its most recent research is to have another measure, because this is the international resilience is one way to look at the equity. But now we can also look, and this is what you saw there. This is the previous image was there. But now what we can do, we can also look at the nationally resilient students. And the difference is that now we are comparing disadvantaged children here in Australia to top performing students here in the same country. So we kind of remove the international dimension here. And that's something very interesting. So what you see here, this is exactly what you saw before. So this is the same, it's a little bit different representation here. So you see that the internationally resilient students proportionally range from 5 or 3% to all the way to 75. Okay, but now if we look at the nationally resilient students here, it's a pretty much plus minus 10%. So the conclusion from this is that here in Australia, and Australia is right here, so you will see that Australia has about 12% of its students are resilient in this country. So 12% of your students, according to this research and data, are the ones that are able to climb from the disadvantaged socioeconomic quartile to the better performing kids. Is this enough or not? You can decide. But the interesting thing is that it's pretty much the same thing across all the countries, including Finland as well. So that's one thing. Then the other one is here, where we are now asking this fundamental question that has been a focus of research for the last 50 years, really systematically, is that how the equity of educational outcomes and the quality of students' outcomes, are they related somehow? Okay. So we are able to do that now because of the data that we have. This is the average of these two. So just to explain you what this means, if the education system, and we're looking at countries now or states, if you are here, then of course it means that you have issue with equity because the equity gets stronger when you move this way, right? So the weakness of the relationship between the students learning in school and family background gets weaker when you move that way. Are you with me? Okay. So it means, if you are a student here in an education system that is here, it means from the research point of view, it basically means that I can ask 5 questions from this kid when he's 5 or she's 5 years old. And based on those 5 questions, I can pretty much predict what's going to happen to her or him during their lifetime of schooling. Because the inequity that prevents most of these individuals to flourish. And then on the other side, if your education system is somewhere here, it means that it doesn't matter how many questions are asked from these kids, because the system and society, they are doing certain things. It's practically impossible to say what's going to happen to these kids, because they are able to beat the odds, and the resilience is very different over there. So this is where Australia is. And this is often what people in this country, our country now, are surprised. And I said that, stay away from fake news, because there's a lot of fake news about it when it comes to education. A huge amount of fake news when it comes to Finnish education. So don't believe everything that people write about education. So Australia is not doing that bad, but it's not great either. I think we should not celebrate and have champagne and chocolate and those things too often. We have to work. We have to ask questions. What is there? The bad news really is that, as you saw, that 15 years ago Australia was somewhere here, and that that's the question. Is not only declining PISA or NAPLAN results. My primary question here is that what has happened to the equity? What is driving this equity away from the system? And my theory of change here is that as we are able to enhance equity in education system, also the quality of outcomes improve. This is the United States of America. This is UK, all the 4 jurisdictions, and New Zealand. And often people after these 4 countries, they conclude that, okay, so is it true that if you only speak English in your one language in your country, you're average? I think one thing that would help here is to make sure that all your secondary children, all the pupils in your schools would have a right to study another language. And it's not happening. The interesting thing is that in the 1960s, I read here in Australia, 40% of the secondary school graduates had studied foreign language in school. Guess how many today of your secondary school graduates study foreign language in school? It's not about how many languages you speak, but learn language in school. 10%. It's disgraceful in a country like this that has fundamentally built around different languages and cultures. And then unfortunately I meet people here who say that why should Australian kids learn any other language, because everybody speaks English and internet is in English. And I say, give me a break. It's not about internet and not about communication. It's about being civilized and educated and able to understand cultures and have a self-confidence of, being a global world citizen. So it's a very important thing. So, of course, Canada is a good evidence of that. That, if you have a bilingual or multilingual system, people learning other languages, things are different. So, Canada is an interesting thing. And if there's anybody in this room right now who says that I have had enough of Finland, don't talk to me anymore. There must be some people here. And I can stop. I can say, okay, let's not talk about Finland anymore. Go to Canada, okay? And, I can promise you, if you go to almost anywhere in Canada, but let's say you go to Alberta or BC or Ontario or Saskatchewan, and you ask any serious education expert there, said, give me 5 things that makes your system perform like this. I can promise you that 4 of those are exactly the same that you would hear in Finland. So if you don't like Finland, if you think that we are too crazy and too different, go to Canada, and you can learn the same things. So my point here is not to try to convince you that Finland is the El Dorado of education, or that we have found the Holy Grail. By no means. But we are kind of a part of this global picture. I often say that Canada is so good that it's in heaven. Heavenly countries are the ones that have strong equity and strong educational outcomes simultaneously. And this is a new understanding through research, through this kind of a statistics and research that we have done during the last 10 years. The others are Estonia, Japan, and Finland. And here are the other OECD countries, and you see something interesting here, that if we take some of these outliers away, like this is Iceland. If we had more time, I would tell you funny stories about Iceland PISA theory. This is Mexico here, Norway. If you take this couple of outliers away here, you see a pretty clear correlation here. Then correlation is not causation. So we cannot really say that one thing is causing the other one. The equity is causing something else. But the correlation is so clear, and it has remained like this for years, that we have a reason to believe that let's investigate further this relationship between equity and quality. And in Finland, the outcome is clear. We are very outspoken and confident that the fact that we have a fair amount of equity within the system is explaining a lot about the high results in academic performance as well. So of course this should be a regression line, but I want you to remember that the improvement path in education is like walking a stairway to heaven. You remember this song? Oh, I didn't have this song. Is it coming there? No. Yes. Some music for the morning. Who's sure all that glitters is gold. Anybody remembers which year was this? So earlier than that. It was a year when Finland started to reform the education system like this. We were listening to this music in the ministerial cabinets and saying that it has to be like 1971 was the song composed. Okay, so these are the Asian tigers we often call Singapore, China. Just look at the inequity that they have in their systems. It's very obvious. If you go there, you see that these are high-performing systems from the outcomes, but not the equity. Hong Kong is the only one over there that has a little bit different approach. And this is New South Wales here that you see. So it's very close to the Australia. It's a little bit on the negative side when it comes to equity over there. So let me close here and just to wrap up with a couple of conclusions. And it's very important that you don't take away this main message here as something that is only my work and my research, because the global international organizations and researchers have concluded exactly the same things. This is what the OECD said in this 2012 report and has repeated over and over again in their own studies and publications, saying that one of the negative drivers behind the education systems has been the faith in school choice and segregation. Australia is, according to the UNICEF, that says that Australia has one of the most segregated school systems in the world. And this is a fact. This is not a political statement or my opinion. This is something that the international research and organizations like the OECD is saying. That we have to, if you want to, the practical conclusion from this is, if you want to have a better system here, you have to do something to this, period. Otherwise, it doesn't. It's a waste of money to try to push the system to do things that they are not able to do because of the kind of assumptions that go against what we know from research. The other one is last year, the World Bank came up with a human development report. It's very significant. All the prime ministers and finance ministers and everybody, they are reading these things, what the World Bank is doing. For the first time last year, the human development report was looking at education. And again, this is what the World Bank is saying. That, if you believe that insisting more private or independent schools and education is a good way to enhance the system, you're wrong, because the evidence doesn't really prove that. Then you are doing something that goes against research and evidence, and you have to explain that. I don't care how you do that, but you have to be able to explain why you don't think that this is right, or why do you think that this doesn't apply in your own country, wherever that is. So these are the very powerful statements that we need to keep in mind if we are facing this research. 3 conclusions here. The first one is that I think what we should do here in Australia is to really work hard and seriously try to make equity as one of the policy priorities we have. Not the only one, but it should be very clearly as part of the education policies, just like we have curriculum and assessments and technology and many others, to articulate in a way that would help states and schools and communities to overcome the difficulties and problems that comes with the inequality. And of course, the funding is it's not the only thing, but it's a critical thing here. The schools cannot do certain things if the funding goes against what they try to do. Australia and the United States are some of those countries that are funding inequality, actually, because of the way the money goes to the school. And that's exactly the other way that it should be. according to the research. Then the other one is that I think we should trust much more our teachers. And again, the research is very clear about this, that we have a lot of international global research showing this, that the more we trust educators and teachers, professional wisdom and judgment in the schools regarding what they do, including students' assessments, the better the system is. And I think, I've rarely seen more professional, well-prepared system as you have here. I speak very highly about Australian teachers and principals in schools around the world. But in a way, it's a system that is keeping them from doing good things, partly because there's no trust. There's too little trust in teachers and schools' judgment. Okay, and this is a very clear thing. You go to any school here, public school, and you sit there for half an hour and listen to what people have to say, that this is the conversation. And it's not only Australia, it's really kind of a global thing. I believe that we could get much more out of the system, this beautiful system of education, by just showing schools that we trust them in what they do. And then the third one is, and this really breaks my heart around the world, but certainly here in this beautiful place, is that we should let our children play more. I think the play is the key for many of these improvements. The problem here in many schools, and our son is now in one of the public schools here, and it's the same thing there, that the kids don't really have time to play themselves. And I'm not talking about play here that is something that we adults ask and direct kids to do. This is something that we should let children, organize themselves and learn through play, all these wonderful things, including, maintaining their physical condition and activity. And Australian schools are not doing this. Many people tell me that don't talk about play aloud because it's a bad word here. Parents don't want to hear about it, and schools and politicians don't want to hear about play. But I think if I can leave you with one thing that comes from research, and there's a huge amount of research, it's this one. I close here. I want to play you a poem that takes about 1 minute, and I want you to listen to this, because this one will give you two perspectives of this very same thing, and this will lead us to the questions and comments that you may have. But take a look at this.
We live in a world of our own making. We are part of a lost generation, and we refuse to believe that a childish perspective can change the world. We must tell our children becoming an adult is so much more important than being a child. We treasured the childish perspective once upon a time, but this is no longer true. We live in a grown-up world. Society tells us adultness is something we should strive for. No longer will it be said that we must celebrate childish behaviour. It is evident now more than ever that our generation is apathetic and doesn't care. It is wrong to presume that children can give us hope.
Children can give us hope. It is wrong to presume that our generation is apathetic and doesn't care. It is evident now more than ever that we must celebrate childish behaviour. No longer will it be said that adultness is something we should strive for. Society tells us we live in a grown-up world, but this is no longer true. Once upon a time, we treasured the childish perspective. Being a child is so much more important than becoming an adult. We must tell our children a childish perspective can change the world, and we refuse to believe that we are part of a lost generation. We live in a world of our own making.
Thank you very much.
So we have time for a number of questions now. Thank you so much. It was great.
Good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, thanks for your very entertaining and enlightening talk. One of the things that concerns me, and I think you alluded to it when you said, these lessons are well known and have been for some time now. However, Australian governments continue to fund private schools, and in fact, this very year, Morrison has put more money on the table to over and above what the the formula decided should be going to private schools. In Australia, if you have a look at the Parliament, particularly if you have a look at the Cabinet, the overwhelming majority, in fact, I believe there's only 2 Cabinet members who did not themselves go to private sector schools, whereas across the nation it's only 30%. So they're overrepresented private school people in those. When you have a look at the even on the opposition side, there's only one member of the shadow cabinet that I know of that sends their kids to public sector school. Right. When you think about those sorts of things and the messages that come out about, we send our kids to private schools, like Morrison said, we send our kids to private schools because we learn values there. We've seen some of the values that do come out of the private schools, but I won't go on to that today. But how can you, and I heard a talk from Andrew Pickley the other night, how can you break that enclave of exclusiveness that exists within our politicians, and particularly in the media as well? When you have a look at the background of most journalists, they too, come from the private sector schools.
Yeah, that's why I'm in Australia right now. I'm trying to think. Is there anybody in the room who has an answer to this question? Because if you do, I have a job for you. But I think since this is a research science and research breakfast seminar, I think part of the answer is that we need to find a way how we move away from kind of a political conversation about these very issues. If this was year 2000, we started in year 2000. Year 2000, it would have been absolutely clear that if I started to talk about equity and equality, that most people in the room would see me as a center labor person. Okay, the values, political values around that. And if I started to talk about school choice and other things, I had a certain thing. And it was a political thing that time. And it's understandable that many people, maintain that kind of a political discourse when they talk about education. But now I think what this very seminar celebrates here, what we should try to do is to move away from kind of a beliefs and faith and assumptions into science and research. And, this is one thing that the Gonski Institute, what we try to do is that we try to bring science and research into this conversation. Although we understand that often what the universities, particularly what the academia tries to do in this field, is very hard to understand by busy people like those who work in this building, or parents or others, that they cannot really read the science and research stuff. So that's why what we try to do is to find also another way to advocate, kind of an advocacy of these things, to help people to understand that, these questions, if you do what your Prime Minister in Canberra, or maybe I could say your Prime Minister because I cannot vote here. I have all the rights and privileges that you guys have, except that I cannot vote. So I can say that it's your Prime Minister here. What they do is go against everything we know about education. There's no foundation to say that there's a research or evidence-based knowledge behind those decisions. And that's what we really try to change. It's hard to do, of course, but we need to have, I believe that, I'm a believer of power of conversations, rather than, mandating or dictating these things through regulations. Most people out here and everywhere are well-meaning folks. As soon as they know and they understand that they are, happy to change their minds. I think the hope we have in this world, in any issue, is that people can change their minds. And if we don't believe in that, in this particular issue, then I don't know what we should be doing. But it's a very hard, and it's a great first question here, what we need to do. But we, together with Adrian and our networks and others, this is exactly what we try to do, to change the conversation and help people to do what they need to do based on the research and evidence, not only from here, but around the world. But it's hard. Parents, of course, have a huge role in this. And that's something, every parent, like we want the best for our children, right? And we do the things that are good for them. But they also need to know and learn that there are many ways to do that. It's not just the good NAPLAN results, or you send your children to the school where the grades are great. There are many other things that we need to. For example, this play is one of my passion. My new book that is coming out a few months later, Let the Children Play, is a huge global research report actually about we want to start a global campaign, a movement with parents, mothers and fathers, to return play to children's lives, because we believe that if you understand that one, it helps you to understand many other things in education. But a great question, good one. So if anybody has a good answer to this, come and talk to me, because we probably have a job for you.
It's wonderful that you're here in Australia, really wonderful. I have 3 questions actually.
So we are close to the end, so one would be good.
Okay. Can you say how many meetings you've had with politicians since you've been here? And can you relate the achievements educationally in Finland to the economic success of Finland?
Yeah, good. Well, I have had number of meetings. Not so many in my new capacity. I've been here for 10 days in this capacity, so I've probably had 2. But I've met many people around Australia. I've been spoken to the parliament houses around this country and had serious conversation with the current ministers and former ministers. And that's why I'm able to say this. I know what you're thinking, and it's going to be hard. And it's going to be hard for me to understand. I don't understand the mental logic in the down under. Yeah, you think in a different way than we do, particularly when it comes to politics. But I'm going to try hard. And my kind of asset is that I'm working very closely with somebody who has a deep understanding about the politics and policies here, Adrian Piccoli. And he told me when I got this job, he said, don't worry about the politics. That I need you to lead the research and help me to have a communication. So that's I'm not even trying to kind of pretend that I'm competent and able to have the conversation. Your second question was about...
Can you relate the achievements
educationally to economic? Yeah, this relationship between education and economic performance is very hard to prove. Almost any economic indicator, you take the competitiveness or growth or anything like this, basically has no correlation with the education performance. Just look at Australia. You're the only country that has had 30 quartiles of positive economic growth, and your education performance goes down. You could almost say that the faster your NAPLAN and PISA results go down, the better your economy is. And this is in many other countries has been the same thing. So we cannot really say anything about these economic indicators. But of course, one thing that is very clear, and there are many people who can prove this from Finland, is that the fact that we have one of the most innovation-driven, innovation-based economies now in the world is certainly a result of the education that we have been. We don't have any standardized testing or standardized schooling at all. It's all kind of a personalized and creativity and play and those things. And you speak to any employer in Finland, big company or small one, they all say that this is the asset that we have here, is this open-minded young people who are able to think outside of the box. They're not afraid to make mistakes. They can try things, and that's a huge thing for the economy like Finland. But the brief question to answer your question is that the relationship between economic performance and education is very hard to establish.
I think we're going to have to call it time there, I'm afraid. It's 9 o'clock already. So I'd like us to all join together and thank Pasi for a great talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
We just make...
Oh, thank you.
That's so good. Very good.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Can I just very briefly, that's the final breakfast for this year. The first one for next year will be on the 27th of February, and it will be the New South Wales Scientist of the Year laureate Professor Nick Talley from Newcastle. Thank you.